I noticed I hadn't done a premiere skin video in a while, so I thought I'd go through another list of all of the characters on the roster, minus one character. I couldn't come up with a character for Hellboy on this one. If I was going to make up an excuse to have a slot for Hellboy, it'd probably be something like Lobo, but Hellboy is a very unique character that's very difficult to find a premiere skin for. Maybe you guys can help me out in the comments with a Hellboy suggestion. I couldn't think of any. So with that being said, in this video we're going to talk about premiere skins for every single character on the roster that will never ever happen because of multiple reasons, whether it be NetherRealm doesn't have access to the rights, whether it be it's a gender swap, something along those lines that NetherRealm has explicitly said, hey, this is not going to happen. But it would be really awesome if any of these skins ever happened. Before I get into the list though, I want to remind you that we're currently going for 15,000 subscribers, so if you're new around here, subscribing would be super appreciated. So with that out of the way, let's jump straight into the list. Starting off with Batman, I've gone with Batwoman. I would love to see Batwoman in the game. Unfortunately, the obvious reason this isn't going to happen is because it is a gender swap. NetherRealm has publicly stated in the past that there will not be a gender swap premiere skin because of hitbox problems. I would imagine this has to be true just based on the way that they said it. I highly doubt that they're just saying that. I would imagine they probably tried at some point and they were like, oh, this isn't really gonna work. I would really like to see Batwoman in a future game because she's such a cool character. Specifically, I would like her to show up in some type of story role in a future Injustice game. Some people get confused when I say future Injustice game. I don't necessarily mean like future Injustice game, I just mean like future DC game made by NetherRealm. It doesn't necessarily mean that that will be Injustice 3, it might be like a whole new series, but for the sake of conversation I usually just say Injustice 3. Next up is Superman. I'm gonna go with Zod. There's a few different reasons this skin would never happen, one of which is just the fact that it just doesn't actually work that well. When we look at Zod's Injustice 1 moveset, it's very, very different to Superman. Superman has like a really specific pose for, you know, look at me, I'm the hero, and premiere skins usually copy those poses, so Zod wouldn't be able to do that, and obviously Zod already has his pre-established moveset in Injustice 1, and NetherRealm has obviously publicly stated that, hey, we don't want skins in the game that have previously had movesets in prior games. Next up is Wonder Woman. The character I would go with is Sif. For people who don't remember this character, it's actually a character from Thor, which is the obvious reason this one's never going to happen, but of course would be awesome, and a relatively okay pick for a Wonder Woman premiere skin. Next up is Supergirl, and I'm gonna go with Miss Martian. I believe she was actually in my last premiere skin video. It's such a good pick, and it would be so awesome, but the heat vision is something that Miss Martian doesn't have access to, and neither is the frost breath, but it would just be so cool to see, especially because I don't think we're getting Miss Martian in any other way. Even in Injustice 3, I doubt that we're gonna see. Actually, Miss Martian might show up in Injustice 3 just because by that time, she would have gotten quite a significant amount of extra popularity on top of that because she's going to be involved in Young Justice Season 3. So, yeah, I don't know, maybe. That was actually a possibility for Injustice 3. Keep your eye out for it. Next up for Aquaman, I'm going to go with Namor. He's a Marvel character who's roughly the exact same as Aquaman. Not necessarily as far as backstory goes, but he is very similar to Aquaman and would make a perfect fit for a premiere skin. Next up is Atrocitus. I would go with Kilowog. I don't think this one's going to end up happening just because of the different structures that you would want to be able to make with Kilowog and wouldn't be able to if he was an Atrocitus premiere skin. Atrocitus works with all the blood and all that type of manipulation, and when you look at Kilowog, he does a similar thing in the sense that he's a lantern, but the Green Lanterns are much more focused on structures, which doesn't necessarily translate particularly easily into Atrocitus's kit, although it is possible. I just don't think it will happen. Next up is Grodd, and I'm going to go with Beast Boy. The reason I think Beast Boy would never happen is just because it would be kind of a slap in the face to a lot of people who really wanted to see Beast Boy. Because Beast Boy is such a popular character, it'd also be a shame to have it be a Gorilla Grodd premiere skin because Grodd is one of the hardest characters to play on the roster. Oftentimes when you see a character as popular as Beast Boy, or the characters like Starfire and Red Hood, they often are usually the more easy to play characters on the DLC roster, or not even on the DLC roster, just on the roster in general. And I think that's very deliberate because you want that popularity to mean something. You want everybody to be able to go play that character and feel like they know what they're doing. Next up is Deadshot. I'm going to go with Deathstroke. I don't think this one will ever happen, mostly because of the same reason that everyone told me it will never happen, and that's because Deathstroke has a sword, and you want to be able to utilize that sword when designing the character's moveset. He also has a pre-established moveset, so again, they wouldn't use Deathstroke to be a Deadshot premiere skin. I honestly think if it wasn't for that pre-established moveset, we would have already have seen a Deathstroke premiere skin for Deadshot, but there's no way for me to say that for certain. And I'm honestly a little bit disappointed that they did do Deadshot in this game, because that means we're never going to really get Deathstroke and Deadshot in the same game because of the pre-established moveset rule, unless that they're willing to have both of them in the same game as separate character slots, which I don't think will happen. That being said, Deathstroke should pick up some popularity because of his involvement in the DCEU in the upcoming movies. Next up is Harley Quinn. I'm going to go with Lady Deadpool. Again, not one that is ever going to happen because it's a Marvel character, but that's the whole idea of this list. Next up is The Flash, and I would like to see Savitar from the CW. Obviously, this one's never going to happen for a bunch of different reasons. The version of Savitar they used on the CW is a version of Savitar that has never existed before. I would go into more detail about that, but I actually don't want to reveal any spoilers for that season for people who like to watch seasons in one go. Just in case you haven't seen that season, I'm not going to go ahead and say what happens, but the whole twist with Savitar, the whole thing that's going on with him, isn't necessarily true to the comic book version of Savitar. So you would be bringing on a CW exclusive character in this version of Savitar. Also, he's very big and bulky, and the version of Flash that we have in the game right now is very slim, and the reason you can't do this premiere skin is the exact same reason you can't do, I don't know, a Katana premiere skin for Robin. Next up is Blue Beetle, and believe it or not, I'm gonna go with Plastic Man. The reason I'm going with Plastic Man is he could actually do everything Blue Beetle does in a very weird way. The reason, again, this one's never going to work is because the amount of animation time and amount of work you would need to put into this one is absurd. Plastic Man could theoretically do everything that Blue Beetle does. The jetpack that he has to dash to either side and hover in the air for a little bit could instead be some kind of like weird thing where he shapes his back into a kite so he can float in the air for a second and then choose to dash or not. All of the weapons and limb stretching thing that Blue Beetle does can obviously just be done the exact same with Plastic Man. And going even a step further than that, if you wanted to have the projectile that Blue Beetle has, well, I mean, you can obviously just easily replace that with like a gun or some type of like future phaser thing. Yeah, I think this one would actually be surprisingly easier than you would expect, but still incredibly difficult, and definitely not expecting it because of how difficult it could be. And as long as we're doing, you know, theoretical things that could never happen for this list, you could actually have any of the stretchy characters in any of the universes, even Mr. Fantastic. But again, the entire point of this list is that these skins are never going to happen. Next up is Hulk for Bane. Bane had to have a character on this list, and I started thinking, what is a character that could really use Bane's trait? Trait is very specific for Bane, right? And I think the closest character you can get who has like a similar stature as Bane is in fact the Hulk. Hulk is obviously a little bit bigger than Bane, but I think it gets the rough point across. Next up is Poison Ivy, and really you can get away with pretty much any character here that has the ability to modify anything. It could even be a Green Lantern character here, like a Jessica Cruz or something like that. Because the problem with Poison Ivy isn't necessarily that she controls elements, like the plants. The problem is that the way she does it in Injustice 2 is it's very much like creating structures. This is the reason that making a Killer Frost premiere skin for her would be incredibly difficult. However, making like a Green Lantern or something like that would be significantly easier. The character I did go for this list, though, is Killer Frost because it would be pretty difficult. Next up is Brainiac, and I'm gonna go with Dr. Ock. Of course, this one would never happen because of Marvel reasons. Damn, it would be so cool, right? He's practically got the whole moveset there. One thing to be said, though, is that Dr. Ock isn't necessarily as athletic as Brainiac has been displayed so far in Injustice 2. Like the dive kick thing, you wouldn't necessarily expect somebody like Doc Ock to do that. The back three is like a full-on backflip. Granted, he does that basically with the momentum of his tentacles. That's something to keep in mind for a premiere skin like this. Next up is Robin with Ra's al Ghul. I think this one will never end up happening because of the batarangs that Robin utilizes in his kit, and also Robin has a very specific way that he poses whenever he does everything. Well, I say everything, but I mean anything. Even down to his victory pose. These are things that you wouldn't see Ra's al Ghul do, and I think that's the exact reason we'll never see a Ra's al Ghul premiere skin for Robin. Here's hoping Injustice 3 has some type of Ra's al Ghul related content for us. Next up is Black Canary, and we're going to do a gender swap for this one, and that's the reason it's never going to happen. I'm going to go with Vibe. Vibe actually can do everything Black Canary can do, believe it or not. Right down to the scream, except he wouldn't do it with a scream, he would do it with, well, his vibrations. Vibe, at least in the comic books, not in the television show, is a mixed martial artist. He could, granted not as skilled as Black Canary, but for the purpose of the game, he could do everything Black Canary can do. At least as far as I'm aware, he's not as skilled as Black Canary, because Black Canary is meant to be like one of the best martial artists, so I doubt that he's as strong as her. For the purpose of the game, you could pull it off. Next up is Swamp Thing. You could do anything here. You could throw in Clayface, which is probably never going to happen because of the absurd amount of animation time it would take. I think another good pick in here that will actually just never happen for obvious reasons is Man-Thing. For people who don't know who Man-Thing is a relatively unpopular character. He came out at about the same time as Swamp Thing, and the characters are incredibly similar. One's made by Marvel, one's made by DC. DC's did come out a little bit later than Man-Thing's, but they were so close together, I don't think either person copied each other here. I think it was just like actual pure coincidence, which is pretty crazy to think about. Maybe there was some cross-communication between each company. Maybe like a couple DC guys previously worked at DC and they knew that character was coming, or the other way around, or something like that. I don't know, because it just seems so strange to me that those characters were so eerily similar. They came out like months within each other, so like no one had time to copy the other one. I don't know, it's just weird. Anyhow, moving on to Catwoman, which I'm obviously going to pick Black Cat. If you thought I was going to pick anyone else, I don't know what you were thinking. Next one is another surprisingly easy one, and that's Tigress for Cheetah. Moving on to Cyborg, I'm going to go with Iron Man for obvious reasons. The slight disappointment thing here is that Iron Man would want to float, right? That's one of the cool things about Iron Man's suit. He can fly around, he can do all that good stuff. Cyborg doesn't really do that, so And Iron Man also has like the big beam thing that Cyborg doesn't do until he uses his super, so I don't know. It doesn't fit particularly nicely. Cyborg also like has a stance that's like very mixed martial arty, and Iron Man doesn't do that. So yeah, this one doesn't feel too good, but it's the best pick for Cyborg for a premiere skin that will never happen. Well, I suppose you could go with somebody like Constantine, but you know, whatever. Next up is Dr. Fate. Obvious pick, Doctor Strange. The characters are just so similar and obviously could pull everything off that each other could do perfectly, or at least for this example of a fighting game. Next up is Green Lantern. I'm going to go with Jessica Cruz or Sinestro or any of the lanterns that are never going to happen. The reason Sinestro will never happen is because of the same moveset problem we talked about earlier, which is obviously you cannot have a character come on to the new game who already has a pre-established moveset, at least in the form of a premiere skin, so for that reason you can't have Sinestro. And Jessica Cruz wouldn't work because it's a gender swap. Next up is Firestorm, and believe it or not, I'm going to go with Nova. I think this is actually a better pick for Nova rather than the aforementioned Green Lantern. And if you just think about it a little bit, the way Firestorm moves around the arena, the way he uses his abilities, I think it works for Nova quite well. Next up is Green Arrow. Obviously, I'm going to go with Hawkeye. Next up is Black Adam. This one's a gender swap and a Marvel character. Two reasons it's never going to happen, and that's Storm. Think about it. Think about all the animations Black Adam has. Storm would be able to mimic them perfectly, other than maybe his idol stance. His idol stance is very much like, I'm in charge, I'm a bad guy, look at how bad I am. Storm doesn't necessarily do that, but she could maybe pull it off if she was being particularly sassy on that day. I don't know. Next up is Captain Cold. Obvious answer being Heatwave. This one's never going to happen because of the immense amount of animation work that it would require, but it would be so amazing. Next up is Scarecrow. There's a couple different reasons this one's not going to happen, but Yellow Lantern Scarecrow. I would love to see this one because you already have a moveset in the game for Scarecrow that pretty much screams structures, right? You could do everything with structures that Scarecrow currently does. So you could create, instead of having his hook be like a regular hook, you can have it be a structure. Having all of his abilities be like physical structures that exist could also work. I think it's a fantastic idea. It's never going to happen though because it's not a quote-unquote premiere skin. One of the rules of a premiere skin is that it's supposed to change the character entirely into a different one, and Yellow Lantern Scarecrow would just be, well, Scarecrow with a yellow lantern. Next up is Darkseid. I've gone with Thanos. Obvious reasons, the characters are eerily similar to each other. That being said, Darkseid does have the Omega Beams, and as far as I'm aware, Thanos doesn't do anything like that. Could be totally wrong. I'm a DC guy, not a Marvel guy. Next up is Joker. You can go with so many different picks here. Two-Face, although Two-Face is actually one that I wouldn't put on like a never going to happen list, which is what this one is. So with that in mind, I've gone with Purple Man from Marvel, who's actually become one of my favorite Marvel characters thanks to the Jessica Jones Netflix series, portrayed perfectly by David Tennant, a brilliant actor and absolutely worth watching if you're curious to see that type of character. So good. Next up is Red Hood. I'm going to go with Bucky Barnes. Of course, this one's obviously never going to happen, but that's the whole point of this list. Next up is Starfire. I think you could go with Nova again. Nova showing up twice on this list. You could go with like a female member of the Nova Corps if you needed to. Next up is Sub-Zero. Obviously, I'm going to go with Iceman. Perfect candidate for Sub-Zero. Next up is Black Manta. I'm going to go with the only character I know that has a jetpack, and that's Adam Strange. And the only reason I'm aware of this character is thanks to one of you guys who talked about it in one of my previous Q&As. So thank you so much for that. Next up is Raiden. I've gone with Electro. Moving on to Adam. Obviously, I'm going to go with Ant-Man. Enchantress, I'm going to go with Scarlet Witch. Not necessarily a character you would expect to do the things that Enchantress does, but you could get away with it. One of the other big problems you run into is all of the idle animations Enchantress has in between each round, and also at the start and end of each game. Her victory pose, or no, you could pull off a victory pose with Scarlet Witch, but her intro dialogues are something very specific to Enchantress that I don't think you could pull off with any premiere skin, so I wouldn't actually give Enchantress a premiere skin, but if I had to, on this theoretical list of premiere skins that are never going to happen, you could be any character on the Enchantress slot, but I'm just going to go with Scarlet Witch. And finally, for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, obviously I'm going to pick Power Rangers. This one will never, ever, ever happen for obvious reasons, but damn, it would be cool. That being said, I say for obvious reasons, maybe I should explain it a little more. As far as we're aware, NetherRealm does not have access to Power Rangers rights. That being said, before they did TMNT, we didn't think they had access to that either. Power Rangers is a very specific type of character. People love the Power Rangers, so you wouldn't want to lump them in with a TMNT release, especially with not announcing it, which they haven't so far. So if you had access to the rights of Power Rangers, even though we're pretty sure they don't, but if they did have access to that, why would they do it at the same time as TMNT instead of waiting until a future game where you can promote that? With, you know, Injustice 3's DLC. Whoa, that was a long list. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a like on the video, or perhaps maybe leaving a comment in the comment sections about what characters you would have used instead of me. My name is Bilbzy, and I will see you in tomorrow's very long outro when I say that I'll see you in tomorrow's video.